tell you a couple things before we get started. One is that mathematics and baseball are two of my absolute passions, and it's going to be really hard to talk about that without some degree of personal stories. So you're kind of be in for that for one. The other thing I need to tell you is that I'm a giant nerd. I mean, I'll tell you that to begin with. And I think that's probably true about most of us who enjoy math. We see mathematics problems in all kinds of things that occur on a daily basis that the majority of folks who are not mathematically inclined, it just goes right over their head. So for example, last month when my wife was celebrating her birthday, and I began to kind of think about the future and mine coming up later on in the year, I wondered the question, what part of my life have I actually been employed by LaGrange College? So I went back and I did the math, and by the way, if you have the chance to do the math, you should always do the math. And so I took into account leap year days and all that kind of thing, and so as of on Saturday, I had been employed by LaGrange College the exact same number of days that I had not been employed by LaGrange College. So as of yesterday, I am now an employee of LaGrange College for longer than half of my life. Okay. All right, so we're going to try to get started here. So I need to do a little intro. My dad worked for the Veterans Administration hospital system, so I moved around a whole lot when I was a kid. And I was introduced to baseball back in 1963 when we lived in a small town in Oregon, Roseburg, Oregon. And I loved everything about the game right from the beginning. It was mathematical, it was logical, it was, sequential, that kind of stuff. Living out on the West Coast, I was initially a Dodger fan. I apologize for that. I feel badly about it, not today. But I loved the way that the Dodgers in the early to mid-'60s played the game. Maury Wills, who was their shortstop, would often lead off the game by drawing a walk. He would steal second base. Jim Gilliam, who was their second baseman, would hit a ground ball to the second baseman on the other team. Wills would get to third on the ground out, and then Willie Davis would hit a fly ball to the outfield. They'd be up 1-0, and they hadn't even gotten a hit. And oftentimes, Don Drysdale or Sandy Koufax, who were their two-star pitchers, would make that one run hold up. It was a great way to play the game. Baseball began to cause me to develop an appreciation for mathematics because there's so much math in it. So if you calculate a person's batting average, this is a simple calculation. You take the number of hits and you divide it by the number of times that the person has batted, their at-bats, and you round the answer to 3 decimal places. So as an example for that, many of y'all have heard of Bob Uecker, and some of you who don't know that you've heard of Bob Uecker really have, because there were some commercials back years ago where one of them, Bob was advertising what Braves announcer Chip Carey would refer to as an adult beverage, and the tagline was, "Must be in the front row." Y'all remember that one? Okay. But he also did a Hilton Hotels commercial where he went to the front desk, and the lady gave him a key to the room, and he picked it up and he said, "Oh, 200, my lifetime batting average." Well, that's true, because his lifetime batting average, if you actually did the math on him, it comes out to be .1997264, and if you round that to 200, if you round that 3 decimal places, it comes out to be 200. So it's true. That is an absolutely abysmal batting average, and not the Joey Tribbiani kind, okay? It's really, really poor. And by the way, I know I can't see everybody in the room at the moment, but I know that some of you, as soon as I put a formula up there, you started rolling your eyes and you started thinking, why do I care about that? So just so you know, mathematics people feel that exact same way when we watch Jeopardy and the category is something like red-headed British poets whose paternal mother paternal grandmother has a middle name that begins with Z, okay? So we're all in the same kind of boat for one side or the other. In baseball, folks typically have maybe some yearly targets, whether you're a batter or a pitcher. If you hit 300, that means you get a hit 30% of the time. You're fabulous. There aren't very many things in life that if you do it well 30% of the time, you make lots and lots of money. If you hit 30 home runs or have 100 RBIs, RBIs means runs batted in. That means you knocked in somebody else, caused somebody else to score a run. In a career, if you get to be 3,000 hits, you're almost a shoo-in to be in the Hall of Fame. If you're a pitcher, if you win 20 games in a year and you have an earned run average under 300, that means, under 3, excuse me, that means that you can think of that as saying that person gives up usually less than 3 runs a game, which is a pretty good indication that you're probably going to win more often than not. And if you win 300 games in a career, then you're pretty much a shoo-in to make the Hall of Fame as well. My early baseball-related activities were playing the game as much as possible. Back in those days, we actually played outside from dawn to dusk. I kept a shoebox in my room full of baseball cards, and being the math nerd that I was, I did not put them in alphabetical order. They were in order from the current year's players to the next previous year to the next one, and I had all the batters first arranged by batting average. And then all the pitchers arranged by earned run average, okay? And we didn't have SportsCenter in those days, so I'd get up and scour the paper every morning to see who got traded from one team to the next, and I'd run back to my room, and I would move them in the shoebox. All right, and back in those days, we didn't have all the baseball games on TV. You were lucky if you got to see one game a week, but I was sure to be in front of the TV when that happened. And just eating up the math of the game. I learned a lot in those early days about individual players. We'll talk about some of those in a little bit. But I also learned that every stadium is unique. Wrigley Field in Chicago didn't have any lights on it until 1988, the year that I came here to LaGrange. Every game was a day game. Old Tiger Stadium in Detroit, we'll see an image of that in a little bit. It was a strange stadium, had these massive lights way up on top of the outfield fences. And those of y'all who are baseball fans may remember Reggie Jackson hitting a home run off that right field light on the top of the right field fence back in the 1971 All-Star game. And Fenway Park in Boston, which is the home of the Red Sox, and it's a very unique park. So here is a shot looking at Fenway from the third baseline. Fenway has a lot of unique characteristics, one of which is the right field fence is both short in terms of the distance from home plate, and it's also short in terms of its height off the ground. This is called Pesky's Pole in right field. It's named after a former Red Sox player named Johnny Pesky, where the legend said that he hit a home run. He was a left-handed batter, and he hooked the ball around that fence to win a game. I'm not sure that the legend's true, but that's what it's said for. The right field fence being short also in terms of its height provides the opportunity for outfielders to jump up and catch the ball before it goes over the fence or even run into the fence and fall into the stands. The rest of the right field fence over here, moving from right to right center, is sort of the same way in terms of its height off the ground. It also has a unique characteristic because the bullpen, the place where the pitchers who may come into the game are throwing, warming up, is right out here. And so a lot of times, if you watch clips from Red Sox games, you'll see sometimes somebody will hit a home run and one of the players, one of the pitchers out in the bullpen may catch it. It has a real strange kind of spot here where it juts out in sort of a triangle. And then from that point, the fence begins to get noticeably bigger until you get to left field, where we have a fence that's referred to as the Green Monster. It's 37 feet tall, and it makes it where in order to hit a home run to left field, you really have to hit it high in the air. When I first started watching baseball, they did not have seats up here on the top part of the green monster, but they do now. It's got to be a pretty unique perspective. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the great players in Red Sox history. Cy Young, I don't know how many of us remember that Cy Young, who is the pitcher who has the most wins in the history of Major League Baseball, 511 wins. Remember, 300 pretty well gets you in the Hall of Fame, so he's getting on up there close to twice as much. Had a lifetime earned run average of 2.63. Remember, 3 was kind of your target. And he led the Red Sox to their first World Championship in 1903. He's actually the gentleman for whom the award is given at the end of the season to the best pitcher in the National League and the best pitcher in the American League. They get the Cy Young Award. Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth started off playing for the Boston Red Sox. He's also referred to as the Bambino. We remember him mostly for what he did as a hitter, but at one time he was arguably the best left-handed pitcher in Major League Baseball. He got sold by the Red Sox, bad move, in 1920 to the New York Yankees for the whopping sum of $125,000, which was a lot of money in those days. It's a lot today, but it really was then, plus a personal loan from the owner. He was probably, and ESPN has recently named him as the best baseball player of all time. He was probably the most dominant player of any era that there was. He finished with 714 home runs, which was the all-time leading total until Hank Aaron came along and broke it in 1974. But there were times in some of those early years when Ruth was with the Yankees that he literally hit more home runs than other teams did. He was very, very dominant. Jimmy Fox, I don't know if you've heard of him, but Jimmy Fox had a fabulous career. Jimmy Fox had a season where he had 175 RBIs. That's more than one RBI a game. He drove in more than one run a game. He has 2 of the top 10 best. Carl Yastrzemski, Yaz, who was the left fielder for the Red Sox at the time that I started paying attention to baseball. He played every single season, 23 of them with the Red Sox, and he was the 1967 Triple Crown winner, which means he led the league in home runs, batting average, and runs batted in. A remarkable feat. In fact, he was the last one in the 20th century who won the Triple Crown. And by the way, his grandson, Mike, is a member of the San Francisco Giants today. Carlton Fisk, number 27, is the Hall of Fame catcher for the Red Sox, and we'll see one of the most iconic moments in not only Red Sox history, but in World Series history from Game 6 in the 1975 series in just a little bit. Ted Williams, outfielder for the Red Sox, played for them for all of 22 seasons, and he won the Triple Crown twice. This was back much earlier than Yastrzemski. He was the last player to hit 400, which means he got to hit 40% of the time. And that's, nobody's come close except George Brett back in 1980 hit 390. You probably can't see this terribly well, but he was hitting .39953 going into the last day of the season, which meant that if you used what we saw with Bob Uecker, it rounds up to 400. So if he'd set out the last day, he would have been credited with 400, but he wasn't going to do that. He played both games of a doubleheader that day with the 400 on the line, and he went 4 for 8. He went 6 for 8. So he went from .399 and change to his batting average of .406. Which is a remarkable batting average. I just put some more up here. Manny Ramirez, some of these guys in some of those days when the Red Sox finally broke through and won a World Series. Luis Tiant, Roger Clemens. I put Clemens up here. I know there were some issues with Roger in the later years, but he was a tremendous pitcher for the Red Sox, and I put him up here as much as anything because we have a couple in our Sunday school class at First Methodist who have a son that was in the service that lost most of an arm in combat, and he was flown back to Walter Reed Hospital, and Clemens came to see him in the hospital. So props to Roger. Pedro Martinez, Curt Schilling, we'll see more of him. And then Big Papi, David Ortiz, who is going to be the lone inductee into the Baseball Hall of Fame this coming summer. You can't talk about the Red Sox without talking about their world championships or the lack thereof. They won the World Series in 1919, and you remember Babe Ruth was sold in 1920. Okay? And that caused what the Red Sox fans refer to as the curse of the Bambino. Bambino was one of Ruth's nicknames, and they didn't win the World Series again in that 20th century after having him sold to the Yankees. And that had to hurt because they're both in the same league, in addition to the fact that they weren't making any progress, and the Yankees were winning like crazy. So talk about some close calls. In 1967, they made it to the World Series. That was Yastrzemski's Triple Crown year. They made it to the World Series, and they lost in 7 games to the St. Louis Cardinals. That was an amazing season. You know, for folks who never got the opportunity to see baseball back in the 60s and 70s, what's up there next is nearly unbelievable. Bob Gibson, who was a dominant pitcher for the Cardinals, pitched 3 complete games in the World Series. He pitched all 9 innings 3 times in a row in that 7-game series, and he gave up a total of 3 runs. More close calls. 1975. This was Game 6 was one of the best World Series games ever. Carlton Fisk, the Red Sox catcher, came up in extra innings in the bottom of I can't remember which inning it was, but he swung and he hit a fly ball, towering fly ball down the left field line, and it was very clear that it was going to clear the fence. The only question was whether or not it was going to be fair and be a home run or just a foul ball. So he starts waving the ball from home plate to fair territory, and it made it. It went out. They won Game 6, and then the Reds beat them in Game 7, so they didn't make it that season either. In 1978, the hated Yankees and the Red Sox ended up in a flat-footed tie at the end of 162 games, and they had to have a 1-game playoff to decide who got to go further. And the Yankees had a shortstop by the name of Bucky Dent, who was a real light hitter. He choked up on the bat, a sizable amount. He was not the guy you thought was going to hit the ball out of the ballpark. And with the game, when they were trailing, he hit a home run. They beat the Yankees. The Yankees beat the Red Sox, and they didn't make it again. 1986, closest call of the bunch. Okay, so they're up 3-2. It's the 6th game of the World Series. Okay, it is the bottom of the 10th inning. They're up 5-3. They get the first 2 outs. They got 1 more out to win the World Series and break the curse. Didn't happen. Next 3 guys got base hits, made it 5-4. Pitcher uncooked a wild pitch that ended up tying the game. And then Ray Knight was on second base for the Mets, and Mookie Wilson hits a ground ball to the poor first baseman, Bill Buckner, who never lived this moment down. Ball went right through his legs. Ray Knight scored from second base. The Mets won that game and went on to win the next day. They failed again. But 2004, the curse finally got broken. They were down. This was an amazing season. The Red Sox were down 3-0 to the Yankees in the playoffs. And nobody in the history of baseball had ever come back from being 3 games down in a 4-game series. But the Red Sox came back in large measure due to the Curt Schilling bloody sock. Curt had an injured ankle, and he went out in a gutsy performance. He pitched against both the Yankees in the playoffs and the Cardinals in the World Series, and won. After they got through, they had lost the first 3 games against the Yankees. Then they won 4 straight against the Yankees to get to go to the World Series. And then they won all 4 games straight, back to back in the World Series. And they were finally champions. They've won 3 times since. 2007 against the Rockies, 2013 against the Cardinals, and 2018 against the Dodgers. The Red Sox have to play somebody, so we need to talk about some of the other great players in baseball. I've got Lou Gehrig from the Yankees, Ty Cobb, who played for the Detroit Tigers. He's actually from Georgia. Willie Mays from the Giants. Hank Aaron, Braves. Ernie Banks, Mr. Cub from the Chicago Cubs. Al Kaline, who played right field, Hall of Fame right fielder for the Tigers. That's my brother Randy's favorite player. Bob Gibson that we just talked about. Nolan Ryan, my son-in-law Wade's favorite player. He played for a number of teams. He has the all-time strikeout record. And striking out as a pitcher, okay? He has more strikeouts as a pitcher. Joe DiMaggio, who played center field for the New York Yankees and who I think has the record of all the records in Major League Baseball that will never be broken. He hit in 56 games in a row. On the right side, I put some folks from the Negro Leagues who suffered a great injustice in not being able to play in the major leagues solely on the basis of the color of their skin. Josh Gibson, who was a catcher and had a lifetime 374 batting average, which is enormous. Satchel Paige, who actually finally got to break into the major leagues at age 42 and still did okay. And one of my favorite stories about Negro League players is about Cool Papa Bell. He was a center fielder, and he was said to be incredibly fast. I got two stories to tell you about that. Cool Papa Bell was said to be so fast that he could be standing at the light switch by the door, turn it off, and be in bed before it was dark. Okay. All right. And Satchel Paige said that one time Cool Papa Bell was batting against him. He had a line drive that whizzed past him. Paige turned around and saw Bell sliding into second base and the ball hitting him in the backside as he did so. Any talk about major league players needs to include Jackie Robinson, whose courage helped break the color barrier in 1947 and ended segregation. He was the Rookie of the Year that year that he came up, and the verbal abuse that poor guy endured was just, it's mind-boggling. He won the batting championship in 1949. He was a six-time All-Star and was the National League Most Valuable Player in 1949. I'd tell you about this because it leads up to the designated hitter. Bob Gibson, that we saw a moment ago, in 1968, pitching was just so dominant. Bob Gibson won 27 games, and he had a 1.12 ERA. A 1.12 ERA. Remember what that means? That means on a typical day, you could expect Gibson to give up one run. And it's pretty hard to lose when you do that. Denny McClanahan of the Detroit Tigers won 31 games. That's the last 30 game winner in the major leagues. And Carl Yastrzemski, we talked about him, the Red Sox left fielder. He was the American League batting champion, and he only hit .301. That's the lowest batting championship figure in Major League history. The mound was 15 inches tall, and pitching was so dominant that the decision got made to lower the mound from 15 inches to 10 inches at the end of that season. And that was step one leading up to the designated hitter, which for me personally is the darkest day in Major League history. I grew up a Dodgers fan. I loved Pete Rose. He was my favorite player as a kid because I think of all the professional sports players, he got more out of no ability whatsoever than anybody I have ever seen. He just worked harder than anybody else. He ended up with 4,256 hits. There's nobody who once they got inside the white lines of the field, tried harder to win than he would have run over his grandmother if she'd have been blocking home plate and the game was on the line. Joe Morgan, their second baseman, Johnny Bench, Tony Perez, who played first, and then Harry Carey would refer to this next guy as Davy Concepcion, and Ken Griffey's dad, Ken Griffey Sr. Somewhere in there, So we're moving to another phase here. Somewhere in there, I got introduced to baseball board games, and there were 4 of them that I ended up playing as a kid. The first one was by a company named the Gamco, then one from Catico, which involved spinning. You put the player's card on a spinner. One called Big League Manager, and then Strat-O-Matic, and we're going to talk about that one. That's the most enduring one of the bunch. If some of you might have seen this, if you ever played, this is an iconic game box. Okay, this was invented by a fellow named Hal Richmond, who was a math major in 1961, and it's been around for 61 years now. And the way that this game is played, you either have 3 dice, the 3 down here at the bottom, one that's one color, 2 that are the same color, and then you either have a set of 20 cards or you have this 20-sided die, which is called an icosahedron, okay? And each batter has a card and each pitcher has a card. The die that's the single color you roll, and that determines which of the columns that you look in, and then you add the other 2 dice up, and that gives you the number that you look in right here. It's really, really accurate. If you were to play, this is Mickey Mantle in 1963, who was obviously hurt some of that season. He batted 172 times. But if you played this game and had Mantle bat about 172 times, the rest of these figures right here would come out to be pretty remarkably close to what he actually did in real life. So we're talking about the Red Sox. So here is one of the Hall of Fame players from the Red Sox, Wade Boggs, a terrific hitter, played third base for them. And I put Oil Can Boyd over here. Y'all remember Oil Can Boyd, the folks? He was just fun to watch. He was a pitcher, just very animated. And one of the reasons I put him up here, I bet y'all didn't know this, his granddaughter, Kirsten, is a LaGrange College student. Here's Bob Gibson's card from 1968, that 1.12 ERA. Check this out. If you spin a 6, look at the chance you're going to get on base. Almost none. These ones with the X's right here, that requires that you roll that die or pick one of the 20 cards, and there's some charts that you look at. Here's Johnny Bench in 1972, and there's Aaron's card and Ruth's card. If you look, you can see Ruth's card much better, but if you see column 2 right here, there's a lot of home runs on it. All right, that's the basic game. They have an advanced game, which is based on the fact that left-handed batters typically hit better off right-handed pitchers and vice versa. And so here, this is Max Scherzer and Mike Trout. So this is Scherzer's card against a left-handed batter and against a right-handed batter. And this is Trout's card against a left-handed pitcher and a right-handed pitcher. Here's Ted Williams' card from his 406 season right here, which is a pretty remarkable thing. Look at that. Look at all those walks and hits. Tremendous. Jackie Robinson. You can even go back and get a sense for some of the old players as well. It's really easy to play. It's less than an hour, and it's really not very complicated. My grandson and I have been playing probably since he was 8. So, it doesn't take a lot of age. So I moved from Oregon to Washington to Seattle, and then I moved from there to Auburn in the 9th grade. If you look at a map, Auburn and Seattle are on the same, are in the same country. They're not. They're in 2 different universes. Okay, I promise you, absolutely. When I moved from Seattle to Auburn, the coolest thing that you could possibly wear in Seattle was saddle shoes with white socks. Let me just tell you, that was not cool. I moved in the middle of the 9th grade year, so I was the only new kid, the only kid walking in that everybody looked at, and I had on white socks and saddle shoes, and it was not pretty, okay? In addition, Seattle, no fault of my own, but Seattle was at least a year ahead mathematically than Auburn was, and so I was an outcast. Me in the white socks and saddle shoes, me in the math class all by myself, until baseball came along. Baseball season came along, and that baseball paved the way for my classmates to accept me and to listen to me about math, and kind of led to my desire to teach. There's a digital version of Strat-O-Matic where you can play any seasons and teams that you want if you own them. You can also play Negro Leagues. I taught an interim class in 2021 where the kids each one of them got to manage one of the teams from the Negro Leagues and get to know the players and that kind of thing. I also play this with my grandson by Zoom. It's a great way to stay in touch with your grandkids. This is Truist Park in Atlanta. So the game actually pulls up an image of the field. This is Tiger Stadium, old Tiger Stadium in Detroit. And you can see out here in the outfield, you see there are multiple decks here. And Reggie Jackson hit one from home plate off the right field light tower in an all-star game, which means he hit it off of somebody who was really good. I'm sorry, that first one was Fenway. This is again, Truist Park in Atlanta. And then I've got a couple, we're going to try to show you a couple things here real quick. This is, I set up a game between the Braves and the Red Sox, and I'll just show you at least one batter here. And we'll do the full screen thing. Ronald Acuna Jr. is batting in Fenway Park against the Red Sox ace pitcher here. There's the pitch. He swings. It's a fly ball to deep right center field, and it's gone. You remember at the end of last season when Philadelphia came to Atlanta and the season was on the line. The Braves were like 2.5 games up, and they had a 3-game series against the Phillies, and the Phillies had swept. They would have taken first place. Okay, so in the first inning here, I'll just tell you this one quickly. So Adrubal Herrera, who's the center fielder for the Phillies, leads off, and he draws a walk. I had the computer manage the Phillies, so I wasn't rigging this. So the computer manager decided to have Herrera steal second base. The batter missed the pitch, and Travis D'Arnaud threw him out at second. Okay, the next guy hit a pop-up to the catcher who caught it, and Bryce Harper, you remember, the supposed MVP of the season, came up, and in this game, and I didn't rig this, I couldn't have asked for it to be better. He not only struck out, but if you look in the bottom part of the screen there, it actually gives you the play-by-play. He not only struck out, but he argued the call. So, and for those of you who know baseball, you know that was completely accurate. All right. One more here. When I become commissioner of baseball, there are 2 things I'm going to do: get rid of the designated hitter, and then I'm going to create a 4th inning stretch where you have to play this song in its entirety, okay? I'm going to attempt to do a little bit of narration here, hoping this is going to work. But you're going to see this is all black and white, which means you're going to see some of the all-time great players in here, so I'll try to narrate a little bit. That was Clemente. Snyder, Ebbets Field in New York. Ted Williams, you saw.
And hold the phone. The sun came out today. We're born
Hank Aaron,
again.
very young
There's
Hank
new
Aaron.
grass on the field. Around the third
Stan
and
Musial
headed
from the
for
Cardinals.
home. It's a brown-eyed
Jackie
handsome
Robinson.
man.
Watch this.
Anyone can
There's
understand
Mantle right
the way
there.
I feel.
Dwight Eisenhower.
Oh, put me in cold. I'm
DiMaggio.
ready to play today.
Willie Mays. What a catch.
coach. I'm ready to play today. Look at me. I can be center field. Well, I spent some time in the Mudville night, watching it from the bench. You know, I took some lumps when the mighty case struck out.
Babe Ruth.
So say hey,
Willie Mays playing stickball in the streets of New York City.
Joe DiMaggio, don't
this?
say it ain't so. You know
Here's William.
the time is now.
Lou Gehrig.
Oh, put me in cold. I'm ready to
Watch this
play
catch by Mays.
today. Put me in cold. I'm ready to play today. Look at me.
Here's the Boston seat, right field fence. Brooks Robinson. Watch Jackie Robinson steal home here. Yogi Berra wasn't too happy.
Got a beat up glove, a homemade bat, and a brand new pair of
Ruth.
shoes. You know, I think it's time to give
must have been
this
quite a
game a ride. Just to hit the ball
Williams again.
and touch 'em all. A moment in the sun. It's gone and you can't tell that one goodbye. Oh,
That was,
put me in cold.
Robbie Thompson with the shot heard around the world. This is the last out of a perfect game in the World
Put me
Series.
in cold. I'm
John
ready
Larson,
to
only time it's
play
ever happened.
today. Look at me. I can be
This is Bill Mazeroski, a walk-off home run, the
cold.
seventh game, bottom of the ninth inning in the 1970 World Series.
Put me in
That guy right there is Roberto
I'm
Clemente.
ready to play today. Look at me. Gotta be center field. Yeah.
All right, I hope we can get back to the other. Wasn't that fun? I want to just say a couple things before we kind of round things up. One of the things that this has done for me, and I hope it has done something like this for you, is it's made me think back about all the wonderful people that God's put in my life over the years. My wife, Charlene, who's been by my side for almost 47 years now, she's put up with all my imperfections, and she kept the kids when I played softball, in some of our early days of marriage. My parents, my dad was not a sports fan. He was a great dad, but he was not a sports fan. But he took me to my first professional game at 6 Seattle Stadium in Seattle, and he took me to my first major league game in Anaheim. He worked out of town, so he wasn't able to come to all my games, but he was there the night I hit my one and only lifetime home run out of the park off Joe Beckwith in high school. I played more Strat-O-Matic games with my brothers than I can count. I had a great neighbor who lived next door to us in Seattle who had a teenage daughter, and when he had as much of parenting as he could stand, he would come over to my house and take a bat, and he would take me in the backyard and he would teach me how to field. He was responsible for an outcast kid from Seattle getting to be the starting center fielder on the B team at Auburn High School. We played our first game in West Point at that field you see when you cross over the railroad tracks going into West Point. We were terrible. We lost that game 20-0. It didn't get any better the rest of the year. We lost every game we played. My high school mathematics teacher, Mr. Bigger, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and who's the biggest human reason that I teach math today. all my colleagues at the college. I have had some great folks to work with over the years, my buddies in Maranatha. And I got to tell you one final story. All three of our kids played softball. All three of our girls played softball. But Beth got started earlier than anybody else. I was teaching, as Miranda told you, I was teaching at Anderson College, and I got my first job when I was 24. First college teaching job when I was 24. So there were several of us who were young, and we were having families at that time. And the faculty and staff got a team together, and we were very competitive. In fact, we won the whole intramural thing one year. But the year after, Beth was born in the summer, and the following spring, we were playing, and I had responsibility for her, so I took her to the game in the hopes that I'd get to play some. And in the early innings, she did okay with a couple of the college kids who were in the stands, and then she got to the point where she wasn't going to do any more. So I did what any loving father who still wanted to play would do. I went to the car, I got her walker, and we both went out and played center field together. All right. So to kind of round things up, baseball is an orderly team sport. One of the things I love about it is that everybody bats 1 out of every 9 times. You don't get to just feed the ball to one person over and over and over again. Everybody's got a role to play except for the designated hitter. Hitting a pitch ball has got to be the hardest thing to do in sports. Having a ball coming at you at 100 miles an hour, not knowing how it's going to break or not. Best hitters do their job between 30 and 40%. Very few other people would be employed in any walk of life if you only did what you were supposed to 30 or 40%. It's a game of failure. It really is, because you're going to fail 60 to 70% of the time, and you got to learn to deal with that. That's huge, because we're all going to fail at one time or another. And it's the only major sport where once you're out of the game, you're out. You don't get to go back in. So it's a huge decision for somebody to come out of the game. And it's so logical. There's so many things going on in the background behind every play. And even the little guys can play. Freddie Patek, who played for the Kansas City Royals, he was like 5'4". He's not going to play in the NBA, right? He's not going to play professional football. You can learn a lot of life lessons from that. And that some of the players you see, you don't want your kids to act like them, but there are people that you do. The best example I can give you is Roberto Clemente. He might have been the greatest player that the Pittsburgh Pirates ever had. He was a 4-time National League batting champion, the 1966 All-Star Game MVP. He ended the 1972 season with exactly that magic number, 3,000 hits. Okay? He is a 12-time Gold Glove winner. That means he was one of the top 3 outfielders, voted on 12 different times in his career. He played in 2 World Series. 1960, we saw a clip of him, and 1971. Both of those series went 7 games. 14 games in the World Series. He got a hit in every one of them. Every one of them. In spite of that, his highest lifetime salary was $150,000, which is a drop in the bucket compared to what they're getting today. He did a lot of charity work in his native Puerto Rico and Nicaragua, and there was a devastating earthquake in Nicaragua in December of 1972. And, Clemente looked around and said, somebody ought to do something. And he realized nobody else was going to. And so he had what former Willow Creek pastor Bill Hybels calls a Popeye moment. You know what a Popeye moment is? It's where you look out there and you say, that's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more. So he got together some relief supplies, and he chose to deliver them himself. And he got on a plane. And from everything I've read, nobody in their right mind would have gotten on that plane. And what happened was no surprise. The plane crashed, and he died. But I want to kind of end with a couple of quotes. Jackie Robinson said, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." And then, the red words. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. I appreciate y'all's attention, and I hope you have a great time when you go, but more than that, I hope that all of us in this room will live lives that have an impact on others, sacrificial lives that make the world a better place, and that we live for the kingdom. Thank you.